Well, it's good to be here at the National Press Club to speak about how we keep Australians safe online, which has been a priority for our Liberal National Government. We set up the world's first e-safety commissioner tasked with keeping all Australians safe online. The commissioner has strong tools to protect children against cyberbullying and to protect Australians, and particularly women, against image-based abuse. But we need to do more. The internet has brought extraordinary economic and social benefits. And as Minister for Communications, I promote the benefits of connectivity every day. But sadly, we also need to recognise that while most interactions online are positive, some will bring danger. We need to recognise and guard against that danger. And as Minister for Cyber Safety, my task is to help build those tools. Keeping Australians safe, of course, is the first duty of government. But by doing so, we also support the continued growth of an internet we want to be part of, an internet that embraces and enables the best part of humanity and not the worst. Our government's approach, then, is a plan to keep Australians safe online in tandem with all of our other work to leverage the online transformation of our economy. Our government and our community has clear expectations about internet safety. Serious online abuse of an Australian is not acceptable, no matter that person's age. Harmful material must be taken down faster. Attempts to send terrorist attacks viral must be stopped in their tracks. Industry needs to step up and take more responsibility. We need smart, new approaches to getting harmful content down when fringe gore sites want it glorified. We are putting the pressure on and keeping the pressure on. Today, I'm opening public consultation on proposals for a new Online Safety Act intended to bring these principles into law. This Act will put pressure on industry to prevent online harms and will introduce important new protections for all Australians. So today I want to start by talking about what the community expects when it comes to online safety. Next, I want to speak about the evolving role of government in helping keep people safe online. And thirdly, I want to explain our plans for a new Online Safety Act. Well, let me turn first then to what the community expects. When people interact in the physical town square, they take it for granted that the rule of law applies. If they're assaulted or defrauded or otherwise harmed, they can go to the police and seek assistance, or they can go to court and seek redress. People expect the same thing when they interact in the digital town square. And yet, unfortunately, some sectors of the internet industry have been slow to meet the community's expectations when it comes to online safety. I saw this in 2014 when I was working on the legislation to establish the e-safety commissioner for the first time. The peak body for companies including Google, Facebook and Microsoft was very resistant. In a submission to government, they said that they had, quote, serious practical concerns with the proposed policy. A rapid takedown scheme will at best take 5 days, much longer than the industry's own processes. The possibility that the policy will push children to undertake risky behaviour on platforms with less highly developed self-regulatory standards, and significant likelihood that the laws will be unable to keep pace with technological change, close quotes. I'm pleased to say we were not deterred. We implemented the policy and it has worked. And in fairness, I will acknowledge that some of these same companies have since developed an excellent partnership with the e-safety commissioner, with material being taken down in some cases within 30 minutes. But there does continue to be a significant disconnect between the expectations of Australians and what is delivered by the internet industry today. And a key manifestation of that disconnect is that many of today's most popular digital products and services have not been designed with user safety in mind. That needs to change. We need to get to a point where our online highways benefit from the same rigorous approach to safety we see in the global automotive market, where international standards enforced by legislation made by sovereign nations are met by global manufacturers as they supply their vehicles to individual nations within global markets. Our government expects digital platforms and large tech firms to play their part. The e-safety commissioner has pioneered a world-leading safety by design initiative, working with industry on a best practice approach to taking responsibility for the impacts of the products and services they are creating. We want to go further. That's why today I'm also releasing the government's Online Safety Charter, a document that sets out the government's expectations on behalf of the Australian community of social media services, content hosts and other technology companies. The Charter endorses and expands on the safety by design principles. It's based on the premise that behaviour that is unacceptable offline should not be tolerated or enabled online, and that technology companies have a responsibility to mitigate and address any adverse impacts that are directly or indirectly associated with their products or services. It outlines the government's expectations of service providers and the steps we expect them to take to prevent their platforms from facilitating online harm. Of course, while we're very clear about the responsibilities of internet companies, it's also critical to equip Australians with the knowledge and tools to engage safely online. The eSafety Commissioner has a strong focus on online safety education, providing training resources in 22 languages to teachers, parents and frontline workers. That's why the safety by design principles and the Charter indicate that platforms should provide tools that empower users to manage their own safety. The Charter sends a clear message to industry, and industry has the opportunity to step up and meet Australia's expectations when it comes to preventing online harms. And my strong message to companies in the industry serving Australians is to read it, refer back to it and, most importantly, integrate it into your daily practices. I also encourage companies to continue to work with the eSafety Commissioner on the implementation of the Safety by Design initiative. Well, having spoken about community expectations, let me turn to the role of government. During the very early years of the internet, when it was essentially a specialised resource for a small number of scientists and academics, many argued that it should be beyond the reach of governments. In 1996, John Perry Barlow issued the Declaration of the Independence of Cyberspace, which began, quotes, "Governments of the industrial world, you weary giants of flesh and steel, I come from cyberspace, the new home of mind. On behalf of the future, I ask you of the past to leave us alone. You are not welcome among us. You have no sovereignty where we gather." Close quotes. Well, such a non-interventionist approach may have been barely tenable in the early 1990s, when very few people were online. In Australia, less than 1% of the population, but it was certainly untenable once the internet became a mass-market consumer phenomenon. And by as early as 2001 in Australia, half the country was using the internet. So the Australian government was an early mover amongst governments globally. In 1999, we amended the Broadcasting Services Act with the addition of a scheme to regulate online content in Australia. At the time, that legislation was world-leading. But in those early actions, there was a certain lack of confidence. The online content scheme provided for differential treatment of content hosted in Australia and content hosted overseas, with no capacity for the regulator to take firm action against the latter. This was based on a view at the time that attempting to impose Australian law on websites hosted overseas was a futile exercise. Well, since that time, the Australian government has taken an increasingly assertive approach. In 2015, as I've mentioned, we established the world's first Children's eSafety Commissioner, a dedicated statutory position with a mandate to keep Australians safe online. We established a legislated cyberbullying takedown scheme, which has assisted almost 1,600 children. We've expanded the eSafety Commissioner's role since then to encompass online safety for all Australians. We've given the Commissioner power to address image-based abuse, and the Commissioner has since received over 1,800 reports concerning over 2,500 URLs and has successfully removed images in around 90% of those cases. The Commissioner has handled increasingly large numbers of illegal and harmful content complaints. It's on track to complete 12,000 investigations into child sexual abuse material this year alone, an increase of 50% on the previous year. And globally, Australia has been a strong voice for online safety. In 2013, Australia chaired the discussions that led to the UN General Assembly agreeing for the first time that the law applies online as it does offline. In 2017, Australia advocated for the inclusion of the online dimensions of tackling violent extremism. in the G20 leaders' statement on countering terrorism. And this year, Prime Minister Morrison played a key role in securing a G20 leaders' statement calling on the tech industry to do more to prevent the misuse of their platforms by terrorists. Over the last 20 years then, governments in Australia and globally have become steadily more engaged in regulating the online environment, and this has meant facing up to several challenges. The first challenge, of course, is that the internet has made it much cheaper, easier and quicker to make the kinds of statements that threaten public safety and public order. People have always been able to make statements which are personally abusive, which are designed to dupe or mislead those who read them, or which provide instructions about how to build a bomb or hijack an aircraft or kill yourself. But today, such a statement made online at effectively zero cost to the person making it can be visible to potentially millions, tens of millions, even hundreds of millions or billions of people. In other words, these harms have always been possible, but the internet greatly magnifies the reach of such harms. The second challenge is that the internet enables whole classes of new conduct which can harm or endanger others. Today, almost all of us carry smartphones, internet-connected devices which can record sound, take pictures, take videos and communicate that instantaneously to large numbers of people. The appalling Christchurch mosque attack in March this year, for example, was live-streamed using Facebook, meaning the devastation and the violence was not limited to the victims and the witnesses, but spread to enormous audiences around the world. This simply could not have happened even a few years ago, when bandwidth on mobile networks was not sufficient and when sophisticated live streaming applications did not exist. Now, our government acted quickly to address the emergence of this new harm by introducing legislation and working with industry through a dedicated task force to reduce the likelihood of it happening again. And as I mentioned before, another new harm we face is the unauthorised sharing of intimate images, colloquially referred to as revenge porn, although I think image-based abuse is a better term. Again, this is something unimaginable even 20 years ago, but today 1 in 10 Australians has had intimate images shared online without their consent. I recently met with Noelle Martin, Western Australia's, the Young Western Australian of the Year, a survivor turned advocate on the issue of image-based abuse. And it was the work of people like Noelle which led to the Australian government responding with the image-based abuse scheme that has since helped so many Australians and a significant majority of them being women. There's a third challenge which the internet presents when it comes to keeping Australians safe. The harms that I've described occur on the websites, social media platforms and other online services used by millions of Australians every day. In the main, these services are based in other countries. So unlike traditional forms of harm, an online perpetrator does not need to be within Australia to impact Australians. And this creates significant complexities in establishing and enforcing regulatory frameworks to protect Australians. If this is a challenge when the services are delivered by legitimate, regulated businesses, it's an even bigger challenge if they're delivered by criminals. Nearly all of the illegal content reported to the E-Safety Commissioner originates from platforms hosted overseas. In fact, the reason that Julie Inman-Grant, who's doing an exceptional job as our E-Safety Commissioner, is not with us here today is because she's representing Australia in Ethiopia at the Global Summit of We Protect, a significant international forum for cooperation against online child exploitation, and Julie is on the board of that important global organisation. This is just one example of how we are working internationally to make the internet a safer place. At the same time, we have an extensive program of work across many portfolios within the Morrison Government to establish clear rules and expectations about online content. The ACCC's Digital Platforms Inquiry, for example, looks at the significant competition and consumer issues raised by the dominance of players like Facebook and Google. Before the end of the year, we'll announce the government's response across the 23 recommendations. The Attorney-General is working with his state and territory counterparts to address the responsibilities and liability of digital platforms for defamatory content published online. and I am working with the Minister for Families and Social Services in taking action to protect Australians against illegal offshore gambling websites, empowering the ACMA to work with internet service providers on a website blocking scheme with civil penalties and disruption measures. But the centrepiece of my work as Minister for Cyber Safety is the new Online Safety Act that we've committed to introduce. And today I'm releasing a consultation paper designed to gather input as we develop that new Act. Our plans for the new Act draw in part on the practical day-to-day experience of the dangers Australians are facing online today, including what they report to the E-Safety Commissioner. It might, for example, be a female journalist who's written a story about gender equity in Australian sport and is subject to extreme levels of harassment, abuse and vitriol from a particular individual across multiple online services. Despite contacting the services, that material remains online, and today she has no avenues by which to have that seriously harmful material removed, other than contacting the police. Under the proposed Act, the E-Safety Commissioner would have the power to have this content removed from the social media services, from websites and from apps. It might be a case of a 14-year-old boy being cyberbullied. The bully has created a video using Twitch where he says awful and humiliating things about the victim and is sharing the link with all of his classmates. Today, that young boy has to endure that for up to 48 hours. Under the proposed Act, the E-Safety Commissioner would be able to cut that time in half. It might be the case of a young woman whose former partner has posted intimate images of her on a so-called revenge porn site hosted overseas. Today, while the E-Safety Commissioner can issue a notice to the overseas host to remove the content, if the website ignores the notice, there's little more the Commissioner can do. Under the proposed new Act, the E-Safety Commissioner could issue a notice to Google and to Bing to request that the link to the offending page be deranked in search results. So let me describe then the key features of the proposed new Act. First, it will set out what we call the basic online safety expectations. These will draw on the Safety by Design principles, the Online Safety Charter, and of course the feedback we receive from the consultation process I'm kicking off today. Examples of such expectations would include providing tools and processes to empower users to manage their own safety, actively enforcing terms of use, and improving the transparency of online safety efforts. The E-Safety Commissioner will have the power to request that internet companies report regularly on what they're doing to meet these expectations. If a company fails to report, it will attract a penalty. And of course, if it fails to meet our expectations, you can expect the E-Safety Commissioner to have something to say very publicly about that. As we committed at this year's election, the government will also work with industry to develop additional protections for children. We'll be asking industry to see that services marketed to children default to the most restrictive privacy and security settings. And we will also work with industry on providing information about parental controls and online safety features at all points in the supply chain for products and services marketed to children. In this Act, we're going to further strengthen the existing cyberbullying scheme, which is presently limited to social media sites. It will be extended to apply to all of the platforms, the games, the apps that our children are using online. And we also plan to reduce from 48 to 24 hours the time frame required to respond to a takedown notice, be it for cyberbullying or for image-based abuse. Now, as I don't need to convince certainly any of the journalists here today, adults are too often the target of serious online abuse. And since June 2017, when the E-Safety Commissioner's role was expanded to promoting online safety for all Australians, over 1,500 adults have sought assistance from the E-Safety Commissioner in response to serious cyber abuse. But the E-Safety Commissioner today has no legislative power to investigate adult cyber abuse. There is a strong policy case for a takedown scheme targeted at the most seriously harmful online conduct which is already criminalised in the Criminal Code. And the government therefore proposes to introduce a new scheme directed at serious cyber abuse against Australian adults with its own takedown regime and appropriate civil penalties. This will help to minimise the harm experienced by victims of online abuse who may not wish to go through criminal proceedings but who are very keen to get that material taken down as quickly as possible. The Act will also address several weaknesses in the current arrangements. For example, as I mentioned before, because of the legislation introduced in, some years ago, the actions that the E-Safety Commissioner can take to address prohibited content, such as child exploitation material, vary depending upon where the material is hosted. If it's hosted in Australia, the E-Safety Commissioner can direct the hosting provider to take down that material. But exactly the same content hosted overseas runs up against limitations in the E-Safety Commissioner's powers. So we're going to expand those powers so that the E-Safety Commissioner can focus on having the most harmful types of content removed, regardless of where it's hosted. And this includes child exploitation material, abhorrent violent material, material that incites terrorism or violence, and other extreme material, as determined by a legislative instrument where necessary. We intend to maintain the current restrictions on prohibited online content, which currently include X18+ content and R18+ and some MA15+ material that is not age restricted. However, through new industry code arrangements, there would be a stronger requirement for industry measures to protect users from exposure to this type of content and to expedite remedial action. The government remains concerned with the ease with which children can access pornography and other types of harmful online content. The codes will require industry to provide their customers with optional products that can be used to limit exposure to prohibited online content in their homes. And the E-Safety Commissioner will have a central role in these arrangements. The Commissioner would need to approve the codes before they came into effect and would investigate breaches of the code. An important aspect of the new Act will be to give the E-Safety Commissioner new powers to work with a wider range of players to get harmful online content down quickly. As one example, an investigation last year by TechCrunch found several third-party apps that enabled users to find groups dedicated to sharing child exploitation material that were available on Google Play. Going to the operators of these apps is one way for the E-Safety Commissioner to get the material down, but another way is to ask Google Play to remove the apps. In last year's case, Google Play removed at least 6 of these apps in the wake of the report. Google Play is an example of what we're calling in the new Act an ancillary service provider. Although it does not host the content itself, it provides or facilitates access to services that in some cases may host harmful online content. The E-Safety Commissioner has a high success rate in having intimate images, for example, taken down at the source, but there are rogue websites that do not comply with requests. Thankfully, Google has excluded revenge porn from its internet searches. This approach, though, is not yet universal, and in January there were concerning reports that Microsoft's Bing search engine could be used to find and suggest child exploitation material. These developments illustrate the potential for third parties or ancillary service providers to play a greater role in tackling seriously harmful online content hosted offshore. Under the new Act, we propose that the E-Safety Commissioner would be able to request assistance from search aggregator services and digital distribution platforms to prevent access to seriously harmful material. So if a website systematically and repeatedly allows the posting of cyberbullying, cyber abuse or illegal material despite requests to remove it, the E-Safety Commissioner might then ask a search engine to delist or derank that website. Finally, we propose to give the E-Safety Commissioner the power to direct internet service providers to block domains that contain terrorist or extreme violent material quickly during an online crisis event such as the Christchurch attacks. This was a recommendation of the Australian Task Force to combat terrorist and extreme violent material online, which was agreed to by industry and the government. To facilitate the blocks, the E-Safety Commissioner will be able to issue voluntary notices to ISPs, and that would be backed up with the power to require action from ISPs. Any such mandatory notices would be subject to appeals and transparency mechanisms to provide appropriate oversight of the exercise of this power by the E-Safety Commissioner. And of course, the use of that power would be strictly limited to dealing with online crisis events such as terrorist attacks or extreme violent material. Well, let me conclude then with the observation that I've been working in this industry long enough to know that some of what I've just outlined will make some industry representatives uncomfortable. But what I've outlined is the next phase of the collaboration that's needed between government and industry to maintain Australians' confidence in the online world. Confidence that the internet is a remarkable resource for good, that they and their children can safely embrace into every part of their life. To make sure we succeed in this effort, I strongly encourage those with an interest in online safety to contribute to our consultation process, and I am confident that through this process we can continue to make the internet a safer place for Australians. Thank you.